The morning Ethan asked for divorce, he was wearing the Armani suit I had picked up from the tailor for him the week before. He smoothed the lapels, sat down across from me at the kitchen island, and slid 2 documents across the marble countertop. One was a divorce petition. The other was the deed to our Lincoln Park townhouse. He spoke carefully, the way he always did when he had rehearsed something in the car on the way home. "Diana, I want to be fair. The house is yours. I've also put $250,000 in a joint account you can access today. That gives you time to get on your feet." I looked at the documents. Then I looked at him. There was something he didn't know. Actually, there were several things he didn't know, and every single one of them was about to change the ending of the speech he had spent all night preparing. I picked up the pen. I signed, and just like that, it was done. He blinked. That wasn't how this was supposed to go. "My name is Diana Harlow. I'm 35 years old and I'm a tax attorney. I know, people's eyes glaze over the moment I say it at dinner parties. But tax law is the architecture of money. And if you understand how money actually moves, you understand how power actually moves." Ethan and I met at law school orientation, of all places. He had somehow ended up in the wrong building and sat down next to me in a lecture on contract law. He lasted 40 minutes before leaning over and whispering, "I think I'm supposed to be at the architecture school across the quad." We got coffee instead. 3 years later, we got married in a garden in Evanston on a Saturday in October. It was the best day of my life for about 5 years. Ethan Harlow was genuinely talented. I want to be clear about that because what I'm about to tell you is not the story of a mediocre man who got lucky. He had real spatial intelligence. The way he could look at a raw concrete shell and see what it wanted to become, that was entirely his. No one gave him that. But there are 2 sides to running a design firm. There is the art, and there is the business. Ethan was only ever any good at one of them. Harlow Design Group had grown from a 2-person studio in Wicker Park into a firm with 14 full-time staff and a glassed-in office on Randolph Street in the West Loop. Over 4 years, it had won 3 national architecture awards and contracted over $12 million in project work. When people asked Ethan how he built it, he always gave some version of the same answer. Good instincts, the right team, and knowing when to push. He never once mentioned me. The problem started, in a way I could point to, about 18 months before the kitchen island conversation. Though if I'm honest with myself, and I try to be, I had been noticing things for longer than that. There was a new energy around Ethan, unexplained late evenings, a renewed interest in the gym that had nothing to do with health, new cologne I didn't recognize, and this small thing, he started leaving his phone face down on the counter. He had always left its screen up before. A tiny shift, the kind you file away without thinking about it, the way you notice a sound in the walls but tell yourself it's nothing. Her name was Jade Weston, 25 years old, marketing coordinator at his firm. She handled event planning and client hospitality. She was quick, and she had good instincts about people. I'll give her that. She was also, as I eventually discovered, running a very quiet side operation of her own that had nothing to do with love. I found out about the affair 9 months before he sat down across from me with those divorce papers. I'm not going to walk you through exactly how. It doesn't matter. What matters is what I did after. I didn't confront him. I didn't call his mother. I didn't do any of the loud, self-destroying things that people do when they're running on pure shock and pure hurt. I know what you're probably thinking right now, that waiting 9 months sounds inhuman. But I had learned something in 35 years and 11 years of practicing tax law that I believe to my core. Every structure has a load-bearing wall, and if you understand where the weight is actually resting, you don't need to push against the whole building. You just have to know which wall to touch. I sat with what I knew. I got very quiet inside. And then I started making phone calls to people Ethan had never heard of. In the months that followed, I had a great deal of time to think about our 7 years together. About the award nominations I had written for him, because Ethan could design a cathedral, but could not write a coherent subject line. About the client pitch decks I had quietly restructured when they came home the night before a presentation, incoherent and undercooked. About the keynote speech I had drafted for him word by word, the one where he thanked the city of Chicago for tolerating his obsessions, but did not, in any version of the speech, thank me. And about the financial architecture I had built, quietly and carefully, around his firm, because that is what I do. I build architecture out of money. 4 years ago, when Ethan was searching for a real office space for the growing firm, he found a 19th century loft building on Randolph Street in the West Loop. Tall ceilings, exposed brick, the kind of bones that made him stop on the sidewalk and call me barely breathing. He loved it immediately and wanted to move in before he could realistically afford it. The rent was steep. The firm was growing, but the cash flow was uneven. So I did what I quietly did with a great many things in our marriage. I made it work. My mother passed away 4 years before Ethan and I married. She was a real estate investor of considerable skill, and what she left me was not just money but a structure, a private trust with a holding company underneath it. By the time Ethan found that building on Randolph Street, I had reorganized that structure under an entity called Halcyon Property Ventures. Halcyon Property Ventures owned the Randolph Street building. Harlow Design Group had been paying rent to my family trust for 4 years, $18,000 a month, $216,000 a year. Ethan cheerfully referred to his landlord as the old absentee ghost who never bothers us. He had absolutely no idea the ghost was his wife. And then there was Meridian. Meridian Development Group was Harlow Design Group's largest client. They had commissioned 3 major projects over 2 years and represented roughly 60% of the firm's annual revenue. Ethan considered them the backbone of his success. He had a framed photograph of the Meridian partners on his office credenza. When people asked how the firm had scaled so fast, Meridian was always part of the answer. What Ethan did not know about Meridian Development Group was that its parent holding company was called HW Capital Partners. And HW Capital Partners was a subsidiary of the Sterling Ridge Family Trust. My mother's trust. My trust. Drop one word in the comments right now if you can believe that this woman sat across from her husband at the kitchen island for 9 months knowing all of this. One word, architect. I had set up the Meridian structure years earlier with completely genuine intentions. I wanted to support Ethan's firm with real project commissions rather than personal loans or handouts because I knew him. His pride would never allow a direct gift from his wife, so I gave it to him in the only language he fully trusted, a legitimate paying client with serious project budgets and good references. He never looked behind the curtain. He was too busy designing. Now, let me tell you about what Jade was doing during those same 9 months. I was being very quiet. Jade Weston was not just the woman my husband was sleeping with. She had her own ambitions that ran alongside the affair entirely separately. In a firm like Ethan's, marketing expenses flow through the office manager. Event costs, client gifts, conference travel, photography for award submissions. It is a category that is easy to inflate if you have access to the vendor accounts and a cooperative, not very attentive office manager. Jade had both. Over 18 months, she had quietly redirected approximately $84,000 from Harlow Design Group's operating budget into a shell vendor she had registered under a cousin's name. The transfers were small, never more than $3,000 at a time. Slow and patient, the way a slow leak destroys a foundation, not all at once, but one drop at a time. I found out because I was preparing the firm's quarterly tax filings. Yes, that too. Ethan had asked me to take over the firm's books 4 years earlier when his original accountant turned out to be generously described as incompetent. I had taken over and simply never stopped. It was one of those things that became part of the furniture of a marriage. When the vendor account numbers refused to reconcile properly, I traced them. I built a complete forensic file, invoices, wire transfer records, vendor registration documents, and then I forwarded everything to a contact in the IRS Criminal Investigation Division who owed me a professional courtesy from a case 3 years prior. I didn't say a word to Ethan. I just sent the file and went back to waiting. In a few minutes, I'm going to tell you about the evening that ended the waiting. But first, I need you to understand what Ethan thought the world looked like on the day he handed me those divorce papers. He thought he was leaving a marriage with a gracious settlement. He thought the townhouse, which he believed he was giving me, was his to give. He thought Harlow Design Group was his architecture firm. He thought Meridian was a client he had earned. He thought Jade was a fresh start. He was wrong about all of it. And he didn't know he was wrong because he had never once asked me how any of it worked. In the weeks following the kitchen island, Ethan seemed lighter than I had seen him in years. He moved into a rental apartment in River North. He was photographed at a firm event looking relaxed and unbothered. Jade was by his side at what was described as a firm anniversary dinner. A former colleague texted me a photo, and I looked at it for about 30 seconds. I started taking long morning walks along the lakefront. I bought a new winter coat. I cleared out my things from the townhouse at a pace that apparently read as dignified composure to everyone who witnessed it. I met with a financial planner about the next chapter. I started mentally sketching what my own practice might look like. For 6 weeks, I genuinely considered simply walking away. And then one Tuesday evening in November, I walked past the Randolph Street office on my way home from dinner. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see the whole scene perfectly. Ethan at the long conference table, Jade close beside him, their shoulders almost touching. A client across from them, nodding as Ethan gestured at something on the renderings spread between them. The light was warm and amber. The award plaques were on the wall behind them. One of them, the one from the third National Award, had a speech attached to it that lived in my email drafts folder, time-stamped 3 years earlier. I stood on the sidewalk and looked at it for about 30 seconds. Then I walked home, and that was supposed to be the end of it. Except, I sat down at my desk, opened my laptop, and wrote 3 emails. Before I tell you what was in those emails, Team Diana, you think everything she did was completely justified. Or Team Devil's Advocate, you think she should have simply moved on. Tell me right now in the comments, because what came next is going to split this room. The first email went to the board of directors at Meridian Development Group. As a representative of Sterling Ridge Family Trust, the controlling entity of HW Capital Partners, which controlled Meridian, I was formally notifying them that Meridian was withdrawing from all current and future projects with Harlow Design Group, effective in 30 days. All 3 active commissions, $7.2 million in contracted work, canceled. The second email went to the leasing management office for the Randolph Street building. Halcyon Property Ventures was exercising its contractual right to terminate Harlow Design Group's lease on 90 days' notice, per Clause 14 of the original agreement, a clause Ethan had signed without carefully reading 4 years earlier. The third email went to my contact at the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. It contained the complete forensic documentation on Jade Weston, $84,000 in fraudulent vendor transactions, full paper trail attached. I closed the laptop. I went to bed. I slept better than I had in 9 months. Ethan found out about Meridian first. His project manager called him in a panic on a Tuesday morning. I heard the story through 2 former colleagues and a mutual friend in the way that only Chicago's professional networks allow things to travel. Ethan apparently walked out of his office onto Randolph Street after the call and stood on the sidewalk without moving for close to 20 minutes. 60% of your annual revenue does not disappear. It evaporates. And when it evaporates, every other number on a balance sheet begins to behave very badly, very fast. He called an emergency meeting with his financial manager that afternoon. That was the day the vendor account discrepancies were pulled up as part of the broader financial review. He had been losing $84,000 to a ghost vendor for a year and a half. He had had no idea. The IRS served Jade Weston with a civil fraud notice 4 days later. By the time the Halcyon lease termination letter arrived at the office, 2 of Ethan's senior architects, People who had been with him since the Wicker Park days had already given notice. Without Meridian's projects running, he couldn't guarantee anyone's salary. The firm that had won 3 national awards and $12 million in contracts over 4 years was hemorrhaging so fast the sound of it was almost audible. He called me twice. I didn't answer. On the 3rd call, he left a voicemail. His voice was very quiet. "Diana, we need to talk. I don't know what's happening, but I need you to call me back." I listened to it once, saved it, and did not call back. He came to the townhouse on a Thursday afternoon. I was there for a furniture delivery. He rang the bell. I opened the door. He looked hollowed out in a way that had nothing to do with sleep deprivation. The Armani suit, the one he had been wearing the morning of the divorce papers, was wrinkled. "Meridian is your family's fund," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, the building on Randolph Street, Halcyon." "Also yes." He stood in the doorway for a long moment. "How long have you known about Jade?" 9 months. He closed his eyes. When he opened them, I could see him understanding something he had not understood before, not just about me, but about the past 7 years. You probably think I enjoyed this moment. I need to tell you honestly that I didn't, not in the way people assume. There was no satisfaction in watching him stand there. There was something quieter than that. Something that felt more like finally being seen. "The house you gave me," I said, "was titled in my name 3 years ago when my mother's estate finalized. It was never marital property. You handed me a document for something you didn't own in exchange for my signature on papers that dissolved the infrastructure holding your entire career up." He sat down on the front step, right there on the stone in the wrinkled suit. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked. "Any of it. The building, Meridian, why didn't you tell me?" I leaned against the doorframe. "Because you never asked. Not once in 7 years did you sit across from me and ask how the money worked, Ethan. You weren't interested in how it worked. You were only interested that it did." He didn't argue. He knew I was right. I told him one more thing. "There is a box in my home office containing every award submission I wrote for you, every pitch deck I restructured, every keynote speech from the past 4 years. I have done nothing with that box. I don't intend to, but I want you to know it exists. Not so. You can repay it, you can't. But because the next time someone asks how you built what you built, I want you to answer honestly." He looked up at me. "Why are you telling me that?" "Because you deserve to know the full balance sheet," I said, "even if the numbers are uncomfortable." I stepped back inside. "The lease termination gives you 90 days, I said. "Use them well." I closed the door. Harlow Design Group filed for bankruptcy protection 11 weeks later. The assets were liquidated. The award plaques went to auction. Jade Weston reached a settlement with the IRS that included full restitution and a 5-year bar from any financial management role. She moved out of Chicago and, from what I understand, is now working in her cousin's restaurant in Columbus. Ethan currently works as a senior designer at a mid-size firm in Milwaukee. His new employer told a mutual acquaintance that he is one of the most talented people on the team, but struggles with the business side. I could have told them that in 2019. I was wrong about one thing. I had spent 9 months bracing myself for the grief of the marriage ending, the way you brace for winter in Chicago, because you know it's coming and you know what it costs. But the morning after I closed that door, what I felt was not grief. It was space. A kind of clarity I hadn't realized I'd been living without. 6 months later, I opened my own practice in the Lincoln Park townhouse. I named it Sterling Ridge Advisory after my mother. I specialize in small architecture and design firms across the Midwest because I understand their financial architecture in ways that most tax attorneys simply don't. My first year, I had 11 clients. By my 3rd year, I had 43. Last spring, I was asked to speak at the national conference for the American Institute of Architects about financial literacy for creative firms. I accepted. My office is on the 2nd floor of the townhouse. My mother's reading chair is in the corner by the window. Some mornings before the first client call, I sit in it with a cup of coffee, and I think about the fact that this house was never Ethan's to give away. It was always mine. Not because I fought for it, because I built it. And on those mornings, before I smooth down my blazer and start the day, I think about a woman who sat very quietly for 9 months and understood something that the man across the kitchen island never did. The most important load-bearing walls in any structure are almost always invisible, and the person who built them always knows exactly where the weight is resting. If Diana's story hit something real for you today, I want to hear about it. Leave it in the comments. What was the moment you realized she had been playing an entirely different game? I read every single one. And if you're new here and you made it this far, hit subscribe. I have a story coming next that makes this one look like a warm-up. You don't want to miss it.